Hey, Discern listeners, 90 Day Fiancé, let's watch. My name is Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist and a professor. As I always say, everything that we say on this YouTube channel, since it's a psychology YouTube channel, may contain triggering material, so watch with care, truly. Talk with your therapist, because things can be triggering sometimes, and notice what's going on with yourself and your body. And let's watch.
Babe?
I mean, we haven't had sex in a long time. Why?
What's a long time?
2 weeks.
What, 2 weeks?
Really?
No, It's been more than a month.
No. Has it?
Let's not go there,
More
but
than a
it's been
month?
more than a month we haven't had sex.
More than a month?
Yeah.
More than a month.
More than 1 month. Yeah.
That's what happens when you have kids.
Yeah, certainly it can happen when you have kids. I don't know the average, but yeah, not having sex for a while, soon after birth or around the birth, totally normal for a variety of reasons, not only physical, but emotional and the sleep disruption, the life disruption, that kind of thing. So totally normal, totally fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Sometimes, actually, there's plenty of couples that are doing really well and they don't have any kids, or the kids are, it's well after the kids have grown up and the couples are happy and they don't have sex. And some couples have sex twice a day. And, so there's a wide variety. I find that people, feel like there's this optimal range or something like it. Research does show that couples who have sex, I think something like at least once a month or something, tend to be happier and stay together longer. I can't remember the exact threshold, but that's just an association. It's not necessarily causal, and it doesn't mean that you can't be happy and have sex less or more for that matter. The other thing to think about that will come up when people talk about this is that almost always in couples you will find that one person has a higher libido than the other. And it could be a difference, like someone wants it 3 times a day, like Colt, and the other person wants it 1 time a day, and so that's a difference in libido. Or someone wants to have sex once a month, and the other person wants to have sex once a year. And this is aside from the topic of demisexuality, asexuality, which is a whole other topic. Some people just don't want to do it, but if both people are allosexual, there's this difference in libido. And there will be these ideas of just like, well, you're supposed to do it this often. And no, you're not. Once you have kids, you're not supposed, instead of just speaking from, this is what I would like to do. And instead of us insulting the other person and saying there's something pathological with you. And there's a lot of conversations there. And I've talked about this before, but in brief, if you're trying to raise someone, because often the societal push is to or at least in most circles, is to raise the low libido person up. And I want to point out that gender doesn't correlate very well with, often the stereotype is the man wants to do it all the time in a heterosexual relationship and the woman wants to do it very little. I've seen it all over the place. And of course, when you have same-sex relationships, you have non-binary individuals. But anyway, the point is that I've seen, we got to break out of that stereotype for a variety of reasons. Most namely, honestly, that some men who have low libidos will feel like there's something deeply wrong with them, instead of just being like, well, maybe I just have a low libido and I just don't want to do it that often, which is totally normal. Or a woman who wants to do it all the time and she is labeled as some sort of crazed nympho or something. Something's wrong with her, or she's manly, and I just love that. It's like, I'm like a dude. I want to have it all the time. It's like, well, no, you don't have to. If you feel like a dude, it's fine. But there are plenty of women, people identify as women, who want to have sex all the time. So anyway, so we're hearing that there's a difference there, and I like the way that they're talking about it. They're not hurting each other, and he's like, oh, we haven't had sex in over a month. And she's like, oh, it's been 2 weeks. She's like, and then you hear her, we'll rewind this. She's like, has it been that long? Because for her and all the, the newborn things and 2 kids things and everything that's happening, you could just imagine for her, it's not a priority on her mind. For him, it seems maybe a little bit more of a priority, but they haven't fought about it. They haven't even talked about it until now, which on one hand isn't great, because you would think they would talk about it. But I also imagine that for Kobe, he's like, well, we're going through a transition. It sucks, but I'm not going to freak out about it. And then he's like, no, it's been over a month. And she's like, has it been that long? And he's like, well, let's not go there right now. It's been over a month. And instead of locking in, because in a more dysfunctional relationship, if Kobe was more dysfunctional, he would lock in and say, I can't believe, he would feel personally insulted. I can't believe you haven't noticed, or you must be lying right now. You're trying to lie to me. Instead, he's just like, oh, well, let's move on. Let's not get bogged down in that issue. And that's actually an important mechanism in a couple that I will try to teach, try to therapize my couples to adopt, which is you are almost always going to disagree about details of what happened. A classic example is, the other night when we got in a fight, you talked about getting divorced. And the other person's like, no, I didn't. I didn't bring up divorce. And the partner's like, yes, you did. And no, I didn't. And then the whole fight will just be about whether or not that person brought that up. And both people remember completely different memories, very malleable, remember. We remember things through an emotional lens almost entirely, especially when you're in a situation like that. But what I will see as couples will repair and heal and learn other ways of differentiating, better ways to differentiate, they'll quickly in the moment be like, okay, I don't think we're going to see eye to eye on this. Let's move forward. So the person, there's a lot of ways out of that conversation. So the person who's being accused of bringing up divorce could say, okay, well, let's agree to disagree. But if I brought up divorce, which I don't remember, but I guess it could have happened, that's wrong. I'm sorry. That's not really how I think. You table it. You sort of discard you get out of the power struggle. This is actually good advice with kids as well. Like a common kid fight you might have would be, you were 40, I can't tell you how many times in family therapy I would hear this fight. The parents would be like, you came home an hour and a half past curfew last night. And the kid would be like, no, it was 45 minutes. And the parents should be like, no, we were looking at the clock and you were supposed to be home at 11 and you got home at 12:25. That's an hour and a half. And the kid's like, no, because when I left Johnny's house, it was 12:20. So there's no way it took me an hour to get home. That's stupid. Okay. And they just yell at each other, yell at each other. And parents, once I get them to this space, will just be like, okay, well, let's agree to disagree that 45 hour half, either way, you were late for curfew. So, and maybe we as parents remember wrong, doesn't really matter. Point is that you were late for curfew. So let's move forward, And that's what Kobe just said. Let's rewind.
What, 2 weeks?
Really?
No, It's been more than a month.
No. Has it?
Let's not go there,
More
but
than a
it's been
month?
more than a month we haven't had sex.
More than a month?
Yeah.
More than a month.
More than 1 month. Yeah.
That's what happens when you have kids.
We're making time for it. Well, we're going to.
Okay, and that was good for her as well. She says, we're making time for it. And then people have a reaction to that, or she reevaluates and she's like, well, actually, we're not making time for it. We will make time for it. And I actually believe that. I think that she values that aspect of their relationship, if we remember from the beginning of the season. So, and maybe that's why Kobe isn't really that distressed about it and hopeless and demoralized, because he's like, no, well, we'll get back there. And, they probably will.
Okay, so there was zero intimacy after Scarlett.
We've had.
So I'm not a fan of that association. So Sean's like, there's zero intimacy. Now, intimacy for some people is a euphemism for sex, but we probably should avoid that, particularly when we're talking about this topic, because intimacy, and it's the definition of it and how we use it in our culture more broadly, and especially in the therapy office, can refer to sex, but you can have non-intimate sex. I mean, of course, when you're being assaulted, but when you have a relationship with someone where it doesn't really feel intimate, it's more gratifying a need or something, it doesn't feel intimate bonding. Normally when we think intimacy, we're thinking bonding, and some sex, or some people, they don't want it. They don't want intimate sex. They want it anyway. Point is that there's a lot of possibilities for intimacy, and I'm guessing they've had a lot of intimate moments that didn't involve sex. They're holding hands right now. That is intimate. They went through the birthing process together. Kobe was in the room holding her hand, supporting her. That's intimate. You can cuddle. That is very intimate. In fact, I would argue it's just as intimate to cuddle with someone, not on your phones, not in front of the TV, and just to talk, quietly with each other, that's just as intimate as having sex. I mean, it's a different kind of intimacy, I suppose, but it's intensely intimate. So we don't know if they haven't had intimacy. I'm guessing they have. They just haven't had sexual intimacy. And you can even have sexual intimacy without it being defined as sex for some people. There are sexual things one can do that don't involve the classics, if you will. And I say this because for a lot of people, so what do I want to get into? What tangent do I want to go on? So there's two tangents. One is that when couples are trying to reemerge, because some couples will go down a road where their intimacy and their sexual life will diminish over time and be completely non-existent. And to come out of that, often couples will try to go right for the gusto and have sex right away. And if they can manage that, then that's great. But for a lot of couples, they have to ease into it through other more broadly intimate behaviors like cuddling and showering together and holding each other and having non-goal oriented sexual encounters, especially if there are functional things happening for people or anxieties or something. So there's that tangent. But the other tangent is that for a lot of men, I don't think Kobe is like this to any noticeable degree, but for a lot of men, their definition of intimacy and closeness and bonding is only through sex. And so when you socialize boys and men to not express emotions, vulnerability, bonding through attachment and conversation and that kind of thing, when you say that is for women and you don't want to be like a woman, you don't want to be a girl, do you? But then you say a real man bags a lot of babes and has a lot of sex. So men have all of these needs for closeness, attachment, intimacy, close, bonding, and they can't meet that through all the normal ways. They can only meet it through this very narrow behavior, which is sexual activity. Well, what do you get? Well, one, you get a lot of suffering men. You get a lot of men who are, drinking to cope with the fact that they're lonely all the time and they don't even understand it, and they don't understand why. They might not even really understand that they're lonely. And you get men who are annoyingly sexual, perhaps even assaultively sexual, and because they have no other way to get those needs met, they're only allowed anyway. So that's another reason why we want to broaden what sex even means and what intimacy means, because we want to think about our needs. For example, and I've worked with couples like this, maybe there's a physical reason or some other reason as to why a couple, it's hard for them to have sexual activity together. It's important to, it's because for some people, they're like, well, I'll never be able to get my needs met along those lines. But when you really define all the different needs that are being met during sex, it doesn't just involve orgasm, right? It involves a lot of things for most people, if not everyone. And so if you can recognize, even just through sex, the amount of needs that are being met, through that together behavior, then you can say, well, this portion of sex, for whatever reason, might not be achievable, but all these other things can be through these other kinds of behaviors. So that's another reason. It's all about our needs. What are our needs and how do we meet them? And when we have a society that defines it very narrowly, then we miss out on all these opportunities to meet them through other means.
Sex since she's been born.
I can say we've had sex about 4 or 5 times since Skylar was born.
Okay, that's fair, yeah.
It's because of me, because I don't want to take any chances right now.
Yeah.
I think you need to talk to Bilal because he knows how to not get a woman pregnant.
Yeah.
So he could probably give you some notes, okay?
He looks real confident over there.
He could do it really.
Oh, I don't think I understood what Kobe, it sounds like what Kobe was saying is, I've avoided having sex with her because I don't want to get her pregnant. Maybe there's a reason why they can't use one of the dozen demonstrated scientific methods of family planning. So if that's the case, then yeah, the only thing you can do is to abstain. But from their talk early in the season, I think they just don't know how. I said this the first time when we learned that they had an unwanted pregnancy. I mean, they've welcomed it and they're okay with it now, but if they could have, they would have postponed, I think, both of the pregnancies to a different time. And the way they were talking, it was, they had a lot of myths and pseudoscientific ideas. And so at first, when I was in those moments, I was like, why haven't you Googled it? But then I'm thinking, well, of course, after the second unwanted child, of course, you talked with your physician. That probably came up, right? Or at least the opportunity to ask I'm sure they went to the physician's office 20 times, 10 times or something. Every time he's like, so, we want to have sex. How can we prevent pregnancy? I mean, here's a pamphlet. There's probably a pamphlet. They could have, anyway. I also figured they would have Googled it by now, but clearly they haven't. I don't understand. I think this show will cut out detail, because we never find out what really these people believe. Their political beliefs. It was one of the things that I noticed about Married at First Sight was that we learned details about individuals' lives where it's like, oh, that's right. Like most people have these pockets of their life, whether it be religion or politics or something. And this show eliminates all of that. I think they want to have these individuals be completely outside of politics or completely outside of, they'll go into religion a little bit, but not tremendously. Anyway, so perhaps the two of them come from an echo chamber where they don't trust the media, they don't trust the internet, they don't trust physicians. I didn't show this, but Emily talked about, I'll just say, a pseudoscientific method of managing postpartum depression. I'm not a physician, I'm not a biologist, but I know enough, and I did a quick search, which didn't take long to find actual scientific studies about the treatment that she was undergoing regarding a placenta. And there's no evidence demonstrating that what she did actually produced the effect that she claims it produced. It doesn't mean it didn't do it. There are individual differences in biology, but it could have been a placebo. It could have been something else. Anyway, point is that maybe that's a hint of anti-science and pro other kinds of odd ideas about how the world works. And sometimes when we talk about this topic, we're just like, well, what's the harm in someone believing in a pseudoscientific idea? Like, well, I don't want to mention the common pseudoscientific ideas that people adhere to, because most of you probably adhere to them, or to at least one of them. And people say, well, what's the harm? It's not a big deal. Well, the harm often is that it creates a culture in society and in the individuals that doesn't follow expert advice, doesn't, for example, election fraud. There's a lot of people, I think a quarter of Americans or more think that, or 40% of them, think that the election was fraudulent. And every expert, including Republicans, have looked into it and said there's no election fraud. And you think, well, what's the harm? Well, when we believe in nonsense and when we believe in websites and Facebook that promote things that are not the consensus in the scientific community, then you get a populace that doesn't know where to look for information because they've been taught that the experts are always wrong or always questionable, and that Joe Rogan is the purveyor of all good information or something like that. And I don't know, but maybe Kobe and Emily in their different ways come from, that's the only thing I can think of as to why they would, because he wants to have sex. And so he's saying, I'm avoiding having sex with her because I don't want to get her pregnant. Now, maybe there's a whole other explanation, like, well, post-pregnancy, it takes a while before you want to do this and that, and you can't use this. But, there's always condoms, right?
Queen shade.
Oh my goodness. Okay, has anybody else's sex life cooled? Tyson Patrick?
Oh yeah, it's gone up.
No good?
You can see
Better
it.
now.
It's better now? Oh,
Better
that's
now.
good.
Yeah,
Better
John-
now?
Yeah, it's
Better now that you're pregnant?
Yeah.
Really?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right. That's another thing that people point out, that particularly early pregnancy, but maybe even throughout, that there's an increase in libido. It could be a variety of things. I don't know the consensus around this, but hormones. But also, I think for some people, it is a highlight. It sort of you're very aware of your body when you are pregnant, or in a healthy situation, you're very aware. There's all these things happening. You're thinking about it a lot. There's new experiences every week, and that can create an awareness that can create noticings of different kinds. Anyway.
Kara?
Yes.
Would you say
Is
that?
it best now?
Yes.
It's insane.
Interesting. Okay.
And for some people, just to be clear, they have the opposite. Everyone's different. Different pregnancies for the same person can be different. So, I don't want to create a situation where people feel like there's something wrong with them if they had the opposite experience. All right, well, I want to thank everyone who's liked any of my videos, including this one, or subscribed. That's super cool of you. It is an indication that you like what I'm doing. I consider it kind of like when you're at a lecture and you're in the front row and the person giving the talk has eye contact with you for a second, and you just sort of maybe smile and nod. It's a feedback. It's like, okay, I'm with you, or keep going, or I'm enjoying this for the most part. And that feedback, that you can't really do that on YouTube because I can't see your face. So the only thing I can see is if you like it. It's like, okay, well, this is this little feedback of that. It's fine. It doesn't have to be amazing for you to like something, I suppose. It's good enough, like it. And everyone out there, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.